Hey everybody, and welcome to this week's garden video. Lots happening this week, so we'll jump right into it. I did take some time and I harvested the rest of my stem lettuce. This is a new variety I got this year from a friend, and you grow it because it produces these really thick stalks, these really thick stems. And basically I haven't shown how you prep this, but you shave it off, you peel it off like you would like a carrot or something else, and chop it up into sticks. And what it ends up doing, it has this really cool texture, kind of like a cucumber, where it's kind of crunchy. It's got a very distinct flavor, and you chop it up. I chop it up according to the directions I was given, although I think you could choose any shape. Throw a little bit of salt on top of it, kind of that draws out a bunch of the moisture. Put it in the fridge for an hour or so, drain off the moisture, and then you can eat it raw or sauteed or whatever, and I highly recommend it. And it's been a really fun addition to the garden this year. I also took a look at my fava beans, and they're growing in nicely, and I think within a week or so I'm going to be ready to harvest them. And I was out there and I noticed that my cucumbers have finally gotten big enough that I want to start supporting them as they grow, because I like them growing up. And so basically I just take the leaves and the leading end of these vines and shove them through this fencing that I have out there, and it kind of, I weave it back and forth, kind of like I'm sewing it into the different spaces there, and it gives it a lot of support. And as the cucumbers grow, they dangle down, and they're really obvious for me to see to pick them. And when I was walking around the garden this day, I noticed that my tomatoes have a little bit of, like, I don't know, disease or damage. They're a little yellow in spots or a little curly, specifically on this one. The other ones looked better. But I thought, you know, I haven't really done much trimming of the tomatoes, and I know they do better, I've been told, so it is said, that if the leaves aren't on the ground and if they have a lot of airflow around them and those kind of things. So I did go through. It's hard to see that there's actually a tangible outcome here, but I removed all of the leaves. It didn't look great, and I went ahead and cut everything back and gave it some space, and so you just see me going around and doing that. And I've shown you a million times me picking strawberries and peas, so I didn't show that this week. But one thing I don't talk a lot about, and you'll see a little bit more in this video, is, you know, once you harvest something, which is super exciting, you've grown it, you finally get it to harvest, then you have to prep it for eating or storage or whatever. And so I kind of filmed this real quick time lapse of me going through a bowl of strawberries, because although it's exciting, there is a lot of work behind the scenes of getting it to the point where you can eat it. And this is me going through the strawberries, you know, prepping them for the freezer, and I have about 3 gallons at this point. You can see how windy it is kind of in this video, and that'll come into play a little bit later in the video. You'll see some of the outcome of that. But one of the things I spent time doing, instead of showing you me picking strawberries, I'll show me picking raspberries. So here's my little patch of raspberries, and I went through and picked a bunch. It's a lot of picking, and these aren't really huge raspberries. You see this a little bit there, but if you go out every day and pick a little bit each day, it really adds up. The next day, I just kind of went out and took a moment in the garden and just looked at the garden. It's really green and lush and full, and this is just such a beautiful time in the garden. I will start harvesting things and pulling things out, and it'll look a little more bare pretty soon, but I just kind of wanted to capture how lush and wonderful the garden looks at this point in time. I also think it's really fun. I have a variety of peas planted, but I have these purple potted peas that produce these beautiful purple flowers as well, which is really fun. And here's just a closer look at the raspberries. You know, anyone who grows raspberries know they ripen every day. You can go out and pick almost every day, and you can see they're kind of spotted around in there, so you really have to work the whole section every day to pick the raspberries out of there. I also noticed that my grapes have started forming little bunches, which I'm excited about. These are a Concord grape, a more established grape that's further over on the property. And then I looked at my cherries, and they're coming in. I'm not sure what the harvest will look like, but I see a lot of cherries on the tree, which is great. And when I talked about the wind, if you look at the peas, they're all shoved off to the left. It blew them all kind of off the structure, so I thought that was kind of funny. Well, not funny, it's kind of annoying. I thought they were going to fall, but they didn't. And here you see a sunflower that got knocked over by the wind, so the wind was pretty aggressive this week. In the greenhouse, I was looking around and noticed that some of my new starts that have come up, I have this problem where at soil level, they get eaten down and it kills the plant. And that happened in the greenhouse this time. That normally happens in the yard, so I'm not sure what happened there, but I plucked those out. I didn't get all of them, just some of them. And then here's my beets. I do sow multiple per little cell there, but then I divide them out into a single cell. And I'll show you why a little bit later in the video, but a lot of people plant beets, like 2 or 3 at a time together, and I don't do that. So I took the time to pluck out the ones that are actually sewn together and make sure they were separated out. I also wanted to pull out the rest of my garlic. I don't exactly know when to do this. I've looked online. I used the Google to help me with that, but it kind of showed that they were about ready, and I don't know that they would grow significantly more if I left them in the ground much longer. Plus, I wanted the space. Here you see me planting a couple more tomatillos and another tomato that I was given from a friend. So I wanted to get those in the ground as well because they'd been in pots for a bit too long. And here's a look at the garlic. I just kind of have it sitting out, nice sized bulbs. This is all hardneck garlic, sitting out in the sun, kind of drying for a little bit. And I also had planted 3 specific varieties, only these 6 cloves or 7 cloves, and I want to see how they taste and how they grew. And so this is a little experiment. So that's them as I pull them out of the ground. And here you see me leaving these garlic kind of spread out for a day to sort of dry out before I move them to a more permanent drying space. Here is me trying to fix the wind kind of damage on the peas. I was like, what am I going to do? And then I just decided to brute force shove it back up there and see what happens. And that's how I left it. My zucchini is already producing zucchinis, which is pretty exciting. I think this might be pretty early in the season. It wasn't huge, but I decided to pull it off. That gives more energy to the rest of the plant later. And here's a better look at where my garlic ends up long term. It's kind of sitting more in the shade, and it dries out for about 2 weeks before I end up cutting the necks off of it. Here's a look at the beets. I was in my garden and I brushed up against this. I did not realize how much pollen this creates, and you can kind of see it in the background. It's hard to capture pollen, but I brushed up against it and kind of wanted to show that because it was amazingly full of pollen and my shirt was covered in pollen. I don't normally show this, but this is where the original strawberries came from. We put them in as a ground cover, and I'm back there harvesting, so this is me pulling some strawberries out there as well. And looking around, I noticed that my cabbage is pretty much ready for harvest, so I decided to harvest a couple cabbages. And like I said, this has been a busy week, so I'm harvesting raspberries and cabbages and peas and strawberries, and you'll see me in a little bit harvest some more stuff. So here's me when I pull out my cabbages. I go ahead and you can eat these outside leaves. They have a little more flavor and maybe they're a little more tough and not as tender as the core. I don't mind that. I will sometimes eat them, but it's also kind of fun just to feed them to the animals. So I go ahead and cut off all the outside leaves, just kind of leave what you would find as a cabbage in the store, bring that inside and eat that and feed the rest of the leaves to the animals. But sometimes if I did want to use the leaves, use all of them, and you can see all the goats and everyone running up to get some food, I would actually make maybe sauerkraut with them because the leaves are more tough and that wouldn't affect the flavor as much. Here's just kind of a look at the haul for the day. 1 cabbage head, some raspberries, strawberries, peas, and a zucchini. And I kind of forget to do this every day, but I walked over to our nesting box and realized that Cedar, our chicken, is still laying an egg every once in a while, so I went and got that. This ended up being kind of weird. I was walking through the garden as I do daily, and I noticed that some of my beets that were in the ground that I planted this year were going to seed. Now, that blew my mind because I thought all beets were biennial, meaning they had to be in the ground over winter to go to seed, but this beet was planted this year and it was going to seed, so I have no idea what's going on there. I thought, well, maybe it's just an anomaly, I'm not really sure. And then I walked to the other side and noticed another seed head, that's what I'm filming here, forming on this one. And I was like, what is going on? So I pulled it from the ground. I mean, they're all good sized beets. I was, debating if I should pull them out or not anyway. But I thought if some of the beets that I planted this year are going to seed, and they're also that size, I will just go ahead and harvest my beets if they're ready. And so I just spent time this day pulling out the beets, and again, this is where a lot of people might differ. I don't actually eat the beet greens. I don't know. First off, I cut off the beet greens right away from the beets because the longer you leave the greens on the beets, same with carrot tops, it wilts the beet. It makes it like squishy. And also, one thing why I don't multi-sow is when you multi-sow and put a lot of beets next to each other, one usually ends up big and the other ones end up small like this. So it's kind of not worth planting twice as many beets to get one that looks like that. So I only single sow so I get a bigger beet. But here was my haul. And then I also decided to, because I had some starts already going, and you saw me just like a day or two ago repot them into like single little pods. It's faster than I would have done. I would have liked them to recover a little bit longer in those single pods before I planted them, but I also wanted to get them in the ground because I'm going to be busy this next week. So I thought, let's get them in the ground, water them in, and they will be just fine. And again, when I talk about the prep, after you put something in the ground, like after you bring them all in and wash them all up and store them, and I mean, I will end up pickling the majority of these, but this is my haul inside the house, all cleaned, all prepped, all ready to go. Looking back in the greenhouse, I did see that a bunch of my lettuce that I'm going to plant in midsummer, because who doesn't plant lettuce in midsummer, was also germinating, which is nice, but it had too many lettuces per cell, so I went and thinned them out. And I didn't even really try to plant additional ones, I just really thinned them down. So I'll have 20 lettuces when all is said and done that'll go in the ground, but here was me working on that. I also, some of the cauliflower isn't going to be quite ready to go on the ground for a little while longer, but it was outgrowing its little seed cell, so I up-potted it. And then, but I did decide, the cauliflower has been so weird, where some of it's grown really well, some of it hasn't grown really well, so some of my starts I decided to put in the ground, kind of in bare spots, and I was looking around, and this is one of those cauliflower that never really took off, but yet it formed a head, which I think is hysterical. So I've been kind of waiting all year for this to do something, and then I look down there, and here is a mature cauliflower, which is just so silly. So my clippers or my leaf cutters were in a different spot, so I used scissors. But so here's me sort of how I would prep a cauliflower if it were normal size, where I cut off all the leaves, feed those to the animals, and then I'm left with a cauliflower head. But this is what I was left with, which is just so funny. Other ones are forming normal size cauliflower heads, but this is sort of, when you plant things in the ground, sometimes you just get, duds like that. But here was my haul for the day. I didn't film it, but I did pull out a bunch more cabbages, and those are my 2 cauliflower heads. And here's just a shot of me feeding some of the beet greens to the animals. Here I am again going out and harvesting more raspberries. You kind of, like I said earlier in the video, you sort of have to go in every day. You have to dig around. A lot of the raspberries grow under leaves, so you have to get kind of low and look under them. And again, if you're out there every couple days, I end up getting, a couple cups, a cup and a half every couple days on that little patch that I have. So it's adding up. I'm well over, I think, a half gallon already gathered so far this year in that little half of a patch. That's my full raspberry patch, but I'm only harvesting from about half of it. And here you see me showing the little bit that I got. And then the garlic that I had harvested a couple weeks ago was ready for me to sort of cut off the neck and sort of like officially store it and even bring it in for use. So here you see me sort of cutting off all of the necks, and then I actually pull off all the roots as well. I don't want anything sort of getting in there. They're nice and dry, and I'll end up storing them in the garage, which is, warm, but a dry area, and I'll put them in a basket, and they are ready for use. The other garlic I just pulled out this week, because that was garlic from last week. I moved over there to dry out for a bit longer. Here we are today. So looking at the garden this morning, here's my cucumbers on the left and my zucchini on the right. Here's a look at my potatoes in the row in front of us and the corn behind that. Everything is looking really nice. Here's a look at my tomatoes on the left-hand side there, and my peas, which are gargantuan, and here's some gladiolus I have that are coming into flower soon. Here's a look at my lettuce on the left, and then that's my cauliflower, my newly planted cauliflower on the right. And I have some other things in the background there. I've got some basil growing in nicely along with some peppers and tomatillos in that spot, and my raspberries. And then in the background, I'm not going to zoom in on it, but it's my asparagus bed and my berries. It's kind of hard to see because of the lighting, I apologize, but that's where my onions are and my huge beet and my carrots. And here's, again, hard to see because of the light, but this is where I planted all my new beets and they're adjusting in fine. Here is that monstrosity of a beet that's gone to seed. And here's where my seedlings look at this time of the week. And I thought I'd just leave you with a little shot of the pond.